Welcome everyone to this new episode of the Privacy Rules Privacy Espresso series, a series through which we go deeper into the most recent cases all over the world and also updates, of course. And we do that together with our experts or guest speaker. I'm with Kelly Dickson from the Australian law firm Macpherson Kelley, and Kelly is an expert, of course, on privacy and data protection as well, in order to provide you with some news coming from Australia that seems to be very interesting, and we are going to do that also with a very practical approach. So first of all, Kelly, thanks a lot for being with us today.
Hello, thank you. It's good to be back again.
Exactly, back again, as
back
you rightly
again.
say, because that's not the first time we meet, and in the past we've been speaking about, in particular, a couple of cases in Australia that were the Optus and Medibank data breaches. Those were very big cases, and what I would like to ask you is a little update on what's happening on this specific topic, in particular with Medibank.
Yes. So in a previous Privacy Espresso, we told the listeners about the Medibank case that had happened, which was one of the biggest cases that has happened in Australia. So just for a very quick bit of the history, it was in October last year that Medibank had announced that it had suspected a data breach incident. In November of 2022, they found that it was about 9.7 million customers worth of data. So a huge issue here in Australia. And in December 2022, one of our big law firms here in Australia made a representative complaint to our privacy regulator, the OAIC, asking the OAIC to investigate the matter. So currently, the privacy regulator is doing its own investigation about whether there has been a data incident, particularly about whether Medibank has taken reasonable steps to protect the personal information of individuals here in Australia, and whether they took reasonable steps to implement proper practices and procedures. So if that investigation is satisfied, then that will be considered to be an interference with the privacy of the individuals, and the regulator can make a determination about that. They can take steps to ensure that similar issues don't occur again in future. They can make orders for redress for loss and damage. And if it's found to be a serious and repeated interference with privacy, then there are potential penalties of 2.2 million Australian dollars. Now, this is lower than what the penalties currently are in Australia, which was one of the changes that was implemented now that these data breaches have occurred. And at the same time, the regulator will be investigating that law firm's representative complaint as well. So we're waiting to hear on those. But there is also some class actions that are being pursued against Medibank as well. There's 3 on the go at the moment, and they were launched between January and May of this year, so just very, very recently. But one of those actions is currently stayed, and the next hearing is in August of this year to work out whether those 3 class actions will all continue or whether they will be consolidated together. So that's where it's at the moment.
Yeah, thanks a lot for the introduction. That's extremely interesting also to know, that there is lots of movement around those cases. And speaking about, you mentioned about laws, speaking about movement on the regulatory framework side. What about Australian government? I heard that there has been introduction of some new laws related to those breaches. So what were they, and where were the changes?
Yes, so one of the biggest issues that changed in Australia with our law reform recently was just before Christmas, because of the Optus and Medibank data breaches in part. And the biggest thing was an increase in penalties. So our penalties went from 2.2 million Australian dollars that I mentioned now to the greater of 50 million Australian dollars, 3 times the benefit received from the misuse of the data, or 30% of company turnover.
That's extremely interesting. Yeah, that's in particular the one related to the benefit for the company. That is something I heard in different fields, but never in the privacy one. So
so it will be interesting to see how they try to apply that, because I think that can also be quite hard to calculate.
Yeah, yeah, and this is already implemented. I mean, it's already working.
Yes.
So yeah, okay. And in relation to these, on the, let's say, more general privacy and data protection side, what's hitting in Australia? What's happening there? What's the situation?
Yeah.
Also relation to
So
this.
at the moment, there is a privacy review report that has been published, and it has 116 recommendations for privacy law changes in Australia. So it's a big report.
Yeah.
I think for our listeners, there's really two key items. The first one is that some of the changes that have been proposed are to more closely align Australia's privacy laws with GDPR that listeners would be perhaps a bit more familiar with. So, for example, Australia is looking to improve consent and make it more robust and more informed and more express. We're also looking at a right of erasure, which we currently don't have at the moment. We're also looking to introduce the concept of controllers and processors, which we currently don't have, and looking at implementing SCCs, standard contractual clauses, or some sort of mechanism to work out which countries are adequate countries for the purpose of cross-border disclosure. One of the other things that is also being looked at, like GDPR, is reducing Australia's data breach reporting timeframe from the current 30 days down to 72 hours. So they're looking at that at the moment. Some of the other changes that are a bit more related to Australia are things like expanding the definitions of what is captured as personal information. In Australia, we have a small business exemption, and that is perhaps going to be removed as well. And there's going to be some other changes for the privacy regulators' enforcement powers and things like that. So not law at the moment, but these are the recommendations and proposals that have been tabled.
And you expect these to, being the first step to have a law there in Australia, and you have an idea of the potential time frame for this?
Well, I think that we will see it sooner rather than later, particularly coming off the Optus and Medibank data breaches. The Australian government moved very quickly to increase the penalties. It was a matter of months, not years, to get this legislation through. So I think that as they consult on these new changes, we will see a lot of change and a lot of tightening up for Australia's privacy laws pretty quickly, I think.
Okay. And it sounds that this is going to be very much, as you mentioned, aligned to GDPR, because the changes that I was hearing about are very, in line with what we have under the EU. So it's going to be interesting to see also which are going to be the relationship between the two areas and the two countries. So looking forward to receive further updates on all of these. Thanks a lot for being with us today on this very interesting topic. Good to know that Australia is moving, and it's moving actually in a very interesting direction. The 72 hours requirement for data breaches seems to be another interesting one for you to deal with, since you had very long time. Yeah, exactly, so far. So Kelly, thanks a lot again. We are running out of our time, so I would also like to thank our listeners for being with us today, and looking forward to receive further updates with you on these very interesting cases and on the topic of laws in Australia. Looking forward to see you very, very soon again.
Sounds good. Bye for now.
Bye everyone.